I hid my daughter's inheritance, and in court she shouted, "This is impossible." That was the moment I knew our family would never be the same again. The courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned to my daughter, Sarah, as she stood there trembling with rage, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms, her designer handbag fallen forgotten at her feet. The judge looked at me over his glasses, waiting for my response. My lawyer touched my arm gently, but I couldn't speak. How do you explain to your own child that everything you did was to protect her? You see, motherhood isn't just about bandaging scraped knees and celebrating birthdays. Sometimes it's about making the hardest decisions imaginable, decisions that make your own child hate you. I still remember the day Sarah was born. My husband, James, and I had tried for 7 years to have a child. 7 years of disappointment, of crying in bathroom stalls, of watching friends announce their pregnancies while I smiled through my pain. When the doctor placed Sarah in my arms, I made a silent promise. I would protect this child with everything I had. James was a good man, hard-working, devoted. By the time Sarah turned 5, his construction company had expanded across 3 states. By the time she was 12, we had moved into that big house on Oak Ridge Drive, the one with the circular driveway and the hand-carved front door that everyone in town recognized. James always said he came from nothing and wanted to make sure his family would never know that feeling. "Family is everything, Claire," he would tell me, his voice soft but firm. "Money is just a tool to protect the ones you love." I didn't realize how prophetic those words would become. When Sarah turned 16, James bought her that red convertible she'd been begging for. I thought it was too much. What 16-year-old needs a car that costs more than most people's yearly salary? But James just laughed. "Let me spoil my princess," he said. "I've worked hard so she can have everything." What I didn't know then was that Sarah wasn't the only one being spoiled. 2 months after her 16th birthday, I found the first text message on James's phone from someone named Elle. The message was simple. "Miss you already. Same time tomorrow." I should have confronted him right then, but I was a coward. I told myself it was nothing. Just a colleague. Just a friend. Just my imagination. 6 months later, I found the credit card statements, hotel rooms, jewelry, weekend trips when he was supposedly at business conferences. All for Elle, Lauren, his assistant, 26 years old with ambition in her eyes and no wedding ring on her finger. I confronted him on a Sunday evening while Sarah was at a friend's house. I laid the statements on the kitchen island, that beautiful marble island I once loved, but would later come to despise. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James didn't even try to deny it. Perhaps that's what hurt the most. He sighed, ran his hand through his hair, that gesture I once found so endearing, and said, "I never meant for this to happen, Claire." The words every betrayed spouse hears. The script all cheaters seem to follow. "Do you love her?" I asked. He hesitated, just long enough for me to know the truth. "I don't know what I feel anymore," he finally admitted. 3 weeks later, he moved out. 3 months later, divorce papers appeared on that same marble island. 6 months later, he was dead. The police said it was an accident. James had always driven too fast, especially on that winding road along the coast. The toxicology report showed he'd been drinking. Lauren was in the passenger seat. She survived with a broken arm and a concussion. The universe's cruel joke, taking the man I had loved for 20 years, while sparing the woman who helped destroy our family. At the funeral, Sarah clung to me, her body racked with sobs. "Why, Mom? Why did Daddy have to die?" How could I tell her the truth? That her father had been rushing to a romantic getaway with his girlfriend? That the man she idolized had betrayed us both? "Sometimes terrible things happen, sweetheart," I said instead, holding her close. "But we'll get through this together." It was a week after the funeral when James's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, called me into his office. Sarah wanted to come, but I insisted she stay home. Something in Mr. Peterson's voice told me this meeting wasn't going to be simple. I was right. "Claire," Mr. Peterson said, folding his hands on his desk, There's no easy way to say this. James made some changes to his will before he died. I felt a chill run through me. What kind of changes? Mr. Peterson slid a document across the desk. He left the majority of his estate to Sarah, as expected, but with a condition. I scanned the paper, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. What condition? Sarah can't access her inheritance until she turns 30. I looked up, confused. She's 17. That's 13 years from now. Mr. Peterson nodded. Yes. Until then, you're named as the trustee. You'll manage the funds, make investments, and can distribute money for her education, health, and reasonable living expenses. That seems restrictive, I said slowly. There's more, Mr. Peterson continued, his expression grave. James left a letter explaining his decision. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in James's distinctive handwriting. I recognized the blue ink he always used for important documents. I'll give you some privacy, Mr. Peterson said, standing up and leaving the room. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know I've hurt you in ways that can never be forgiven. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But there's something you need to know about Sarah. Our daughter has been keeping secrets from you. About 6 months ago, she came to me asking for money. A lot of money. When I asked why, she broke down and told me she'd gotten involved with some people. Bad people, gambling debts. She was in over her head. I paid it off, Claire. $75,000. I made her promise it would never happen again. But last month she came back asking for more. She said they would hurt her if she didn't pay. I gave her the money again. But I knew then that something had to change. Sarah has a problem, Claire. A serious one. And I'm afraid that if she gets unlimited access to her inheritance, she'll destroy herself. That's why I've set this condition. You know our daughter better than anyone. You'll know when she's ready for the responsibility. Until then, protect her from herself. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But please, do this one thing. Don't tell Sarah about her gambling problem. She'd be mortified if she knew you were aware of it. Let her come to you when she's ready. I'm sorry for everything. James! I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking more with each reading. Sarah? Gambling? It couldn't be true. My straight-A student? My responsible girl who volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend? No, James had to be mistaken. But why would he lie about this? What would he gain? I drove home in a daze, the letter tucked securely in my purse. Sarah was waiting for me, her eyes red and puffy from crying. What did Mr. Peterson say, Mom? She asked, her voice small. I forced a smile. Just some paperwork about your dad's estate. Nothing to worry about right now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about James's letter. If what he said was true, Sarah needed help, professional help. But how could I bring it up without revealing that I knew her secret? And then there was the money. James had built his company from nothing into a $12 million enterprise. With life insurance and other investments, Sarah's inheritance would be close to $15 million, an enormous amount of money for anyone, let alone a troubled 17-year-old. The next morning, I made a decision. I would say nothing about the gambling. I would watch Sarah carefully for signs, and I would protect her inheritance until I was absolutely certain she could handle it. For 3 months, everything seemed normal. Sarah grieved for her father, but she continued to excel in school. She was accepted to Princeton, her dream school, with a full academic scholarship. I was proud of her, and a little relieved. Perhaps James had been wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. It was nearly 2 a.m. when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the local police department. Mrs. Wilson, this is Officer Reynolds. We have your daughter, Sarah, at the station. My heart dropped to my stomach. Is she hurt? No, ma'am. She's fine physically. But she was caught in a private poker game at the Monarch Hotel. An illegal game, Mrs. Wilson, with some very unsavory characters. I drove to the police station in my pajamas, my mind racing. When I saw Sarah sitting on a bench in the holding area, her makeup smeared from crying, she looked so young, so vulnerable. "Mom," she whispered when she saw me, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." Officer Reynolds explained that because Sarah was still a minor, and this was her first offense, they wouldn't press charges, but he made it clear, next time there would be consequences. In the car on the way home, Sarah confessed everything. How she'd started gambling during her junior year with fake IDs at the Riverboat Casino. How she'd won big at first, then lost even bigger. How her father had bailed her out twice. "I promised Daddy I would stop," she sobbed. "And I did for a while. But after he died, it was the only thing that made me feel better. Like I could control something when everything else was falling apart." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, reaching for her hand. "We'll get you help, whatever it takes." The next day, I found a therapist who specialized in addiction. Sarah agreed to go. She also agreed to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week. I wanted to believe she was serious about recovery, but James's warning echoed in my mind. 2 weeks later, I discovered $3,000 missing from my checking account. When confronted, Sarah broke down again. "I just needed one more chance to win it all back," she cried. "I was going to replace it, I swear." It was then I knew James had been right. Sarah wasn't ready for her inheritance. Not yet. For the next few months, we established a routine. Therapy sessions, GA meetings, regular check-ins with me about her feelings and triggers. Sarah seemed to be improving. She graduated high school with honors and was preparing for Princeton in the fall. The subject of her inheritance hadn't come up yet. I knew I would have to tell her eventually, but I wanted to wait until she was stronger, more stable. But life rarely goes according to plan. A week before Sarah was due to leave for college, James's sister Diane came to visit. I had always liked Diane. She was straightforward and kind, much like her brother had been before everything went wrong. We were having coffee in the kitchen while Sarah was upstairs packing, when Diane asked, "So, has Sarah decided what she's going to do with her inheritance?" That's a lot of responsibility for a young girl. I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. "We haven't discussed the details yet." Diane looked confused. "Really? James told me he was leaving everything to her. I just assumed." At that moment, Sarah walked into the kitchen. "What inheritance?" The look on my face must have given me away because Sarah's expression changed from curiosity to suspicion in an instant. "Mom, what is Aunt Diane talking about?" I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Your father left you his estate, sweetheart. But there are some conditions we need to discuss." "What kind of conditions?" Sarah's voice had an edge to it now. Diane, sensing the tension, stood up. "I should give you two some privacy." "No," Sarah said sharply. "Stay, Aunt Diane. I want to hear this." And so, with Diane as an uncomfortable witness, I explained about the trust, about how Sarah couldn't access her full inheritance until she turned 30, about how I was the trustee responsible for managing the money. What I didn't explain was why. I kept James's letter to myself, honoring his request not to humiliate Sarah by revealing her gambling problem. Sarah listened in silence, her face growing harder with each word I spoke. "So, you've known about this for months," she said when I finished. "And you didn't tell me." "I was waiting for the right time," I said weakly. "The right time?" Sarah's voice rose. "When would that be, Mom? When I'm 30? When you've had 13 years to control my money?" "Sarah, it's not like that." "How much?" she interrupted. "How much did Dad leave me?" I hesitated. "About 15 million. Total." Sarah's eyes widened, then narrowed. "And you're in charge of all of it?" "As the trustee, yes, but—" "This is unbelievable," Sarah said, standing up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Dad would never do this to me. Never." "Your father wanted to protect you," I said, desperately trying to make her understand, without revealing the full truth. Sarah laughed, a harsh sound I'd never heard from her before. "Protect me? Or control me? Like you're trying to do now?" She stormed out of the kitchen, and moments later, I heard her bedroom door slam. Diane looked at me sympathetically. That could have gone better. You think? I sighed, pressing my fingers to my temples where a headache was forming. I was trying to wait until she was more stable. Diane's eyebrows shot up. Stable? What does that mean? And so I told her about Sarah's gambling problem, about James's letter, about my fears that Sarah would squander her inheritance, or worse, fall deeper into addiction. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Claire, she finally said, I think there's something you should know about my brother. Diane's words hit me like a physical blow. James had a gambling problem, too. For years. I stared at her, uncomprehending. What? No, that's impossible. I would have known. Diane shook her head sadly. He was very good at hiding it, Claire. Our father had the same issue. It destroyed our family. James swore he'd never be like that, but... She trailed off, her eyes distant with painful memories. But his business was successful, I protested. We had money. Yes, because James was brilliant. The company did well despite his problem, not because he had everything under control. Diane reached across the table and took my hand. There were times, Claire, when the company almost went bankrupt because of his gambling debts. He would always pull it back from the brink somehow, but it was a constant cycle. My mind was reeling. Why didn't you ever tell me? He made me promise not to. He was my brother, and he swore each time that he'd stopped for good. Diane's eyes filled with tears. I should have told you. I see that now. So this letter about Sarah, I pulled it from my purse where I'd been keeping it, unable to bring myself to destroy it. This could be James projecting his own problem onto her? Diane read it quickly, her frown deepening. This doesn't sound like James. It sounds like... Like what? I prompted when she fell silent. Like someone trying to control the narrative, Diane said carefully. Like someone trying to make sure their version of events is what people believe. You think he was lying about Sarah? I felt sick to my stomach. I don't know, Diane admitted. It's possible Sarah does have a problem. The gambling addiction can be hereditary. But it's also possible that James was covering his tracks. I thought about the night Sarah had been picked up by the police, her tearful confession in the car, the missing $3,000 from my account. Those things had happened after James's death, after the letter was written. Sarah did get into trouble with gambling, I said slowly. That much is true. Then perhaps James recognized the signs because he knew them so well, Diane suggested. Or perhaps, came a cold voice from the doorway, he was setting me up to take the blame for his own mistakes. Sarah stood there, her face pale but composed. How long had she been listening? What do you mean, sweetheart? I asked, my heart pounding. Sarah walked into the kitchen and sat down across from me. I heard everything, Mom, about Dad's gambling problem. She took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you, too. Something Dad made me promise never to tell anyone, especially you. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, intelligent daughter, who suddenly seemed much older than her 18 years. Dad did bail me out twice, Sarah said quietly, but not from gambling debts, from his gambling debts. I felt the room tilt slightly. What? He told me he was in trouble, that some men were threatening him. He needed cash that wouldn't leave a paper trail that might get back to you or the company's board. Sarah's voice trembled. He said if I helped him, he'd pay for my entire college education, that I wouldn't have to worry about student loans. Oh my God, I whispered. I withdrew the maximum from my college savings account, the one Grandma set up for me. Twice, $75 total. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I gave it all to Dad. He said he'd replace it before I needed it for school. But you got a scholarship to Princeton, I said, struggling to process everything. Yes, thank God, Sarah agreed. Because after Dad died, I checked my college account. It was empty. He never replaced the money. I felt like I might be sick. But the police said you were caught gambling. Sarah wiped away a tear. I was. After Dad died, I was so angry, so hurt. I wanted to understand why he would do what he did, why he would steal from me, why he would lie to you. So I went to a casino. I thought maybe if I could feel what he felt when he gambled, I might understand him better. Oh, Sarah. My heart broke for her. It was stupid, she admitted. I lost the $3,000 I took from your account in one night. I hated every minute of it. The noise, the desperation in people's eyes. But I was desperate too, Mom. Desperate to make sense of why my father would betray us like that. The three of us sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Diane spoke. Claire, I think you need to tell Sarah everything. About the inheritance, about the conditions, about what James asked you to do as trustee. I nodded, numb. You're right. And so I did. I explained about the trust, about how Sarah couldn't access the principal until she was 30, about how I could approve distributions for education, health, and living expenses in the meantime. So basically, I'm at your mercy for the next 12 years, Sarah said when I finished, her voice flat. No, sweetheart. The trust has clear guidelines. I can't withhold funds for legitimate expenses. But you get to decide what's legitimate, Sarah pointed out. And after what Dad did, after what he made you believe about me, how can I trust that you'll be fair? The question stung, but I understood her fear. What if we modified the trust? I suggested. We could bring in a neutral third party, a financial advisor or even a bank's trust department, to serve as co-trustee. They would have to approve any decisions I make. Sarah considered this. I don't know, Mom. I need time to think. Of course, I said quickly. Take all the time you need. Sarah left for Princeton the following week. Our relationship was strained, but at least we were talking. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma, and we had weekly video sessions. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild trust. Then came the letter from Mr. Peterson. Dear Mrs. Wilson, it began. It has come to my attention that your daughter Sarah has filed a petition with the probate court to contest her father's will and trust arrangements. A hearing has been scheduled for October 15th. I called Sarah immediately. You're contesting the will? Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have tried to talk me out of it, Sarah replied, her voice cool and determined. I'm 18 now, Mom, an adult. I should have control over my own inheritance. Sarah, $15 million is a lot of responsibility. A responsibility you think I can't handle, she interrupted, just like Dad thought. That's not true, I protested. I suggested a co-trustee, remember? A co-trustee who would still leave me begging for my own money, Sarah said bitterly. No thanks. Please don't do this, I pleaded. We were making progress in therapy. This isn't about our relationship, Mom. It's about my financial independence. But it was about our relationship. We both knew it. And as the court date approached, the fragile trust we'd been rebuilding crumbled. October 15th dawned crisp and clear. I wore a conservative navy suit, the one James always said made me look trustworthy. Sarah arrived at the courthouse with a lawyer I didn't recognize, dressed in a simple black dress that made her look older than her years. We barely spoke before entering the courtroom. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Harriet Monroe, called the proceedings to order. Sarah's lawyer went first, arguing that the trust was overly restrictive and based on false premises. Your Honor, James Wilson created this trust under the mistaken belief that his daughter had a gambling problem. We have evidence that Mr. Wilson himself was the one with the addiction, and that he misappropriated funds from his daughter's college savings account to pay his own gambling debts. I winced as the lawyer detailed James's deceptions. It hurt to hear our family's private pain laid bare in this sterile courtroom, but I couldn't deny the truth of it. When it was my lawyer's turn, he took a different approach. Your Honor, while Mrs. Wilson acknowledges the unfortunate circumstances surrounding her late husband's actions, she believes the trust itself serves a valid purpose. Ms. Wilson is barely 18, a first-year college student with no financial management experience. The trust ensures she will have funds for her education, healthcare and living expenses now, while preserving the bulk of the inheritance until she has more life experience. Judge Monroe looked thoughtful. Mrs. Wilson, would you like to make a statement? I stood, my legs shaky. Yes, Your Honor. I turned slightly so I could see Sarah as I spoke. I want to make it clear that I don't believe my daughter has a gambling problem. Her father was wrong about that, and I was wrong to believe him without investigating further. Sarah is intelligent, responsible, and more mature than many adults I know. Sarah's expression softened slightly. However, I continued, I do believe that receiving such a large inheritance all at once could be overwhelming for anyone, especially someone just starting college and adult life. I'm not opposed to modifying the trust to give Sarah more autonomy, perhaps lowering the age restriction from 30 to 25, or establishing a schedule of distributions over time rather than one lump sum. I took a deep breath. What I'm asking for is a compromise that protects Sarah's future while respecting her as the capable young woman she is. Judge Monroe nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Ms. Wilson, would you like to respond? Sarah stood, her chin held high. Yes, Your Honor. She looked directly at me as she began to speak. My mother says she wants to protect my future, but what she's really doing is controlling my present. My father lied to her about me, and despite everything we've learned about his deceptions, she still doesn't trust me enough to manage my own inheritance. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more confident. I'm not asking for $15 million in cash, Your Honor. I'm asking for the right to make my own financial decisions, with professional guidance if necessary. I'm asking to be treated like the adult the law says I am. Judge Monroe considered this. I appreciate both perspectives. Before I make my ruling, I'd like to ask Mrs. Wilson one question. If you were in your daughter's position, what would convince you that the trustee had your best interests at heart? The question caught me off guard. I thought carefully before answering. Transparency, I finally said. Regular communication about the trust's investments and performance. Clear criteria for approving distributions, and a voice in major decisions. Judge Monroe turned to Sarah. And you, Ms. Wilson, what would make this arrangement acceptable to you? Sarah hesitated. I want independence, Your Honor, but I also want... She glanced at me. I want to know my mother is on my side, that she sees me as a partner, not a child to be managed. And what about you? If you were in my place, what would you do? Comment here. Judge Monroe nodded thoughtfully. I'm going to take this matter under advisement. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for my ruling. She banged her gavel, and the court was adjourned. As people began filing out of the courtroom, I caught Sarah's eye. For a moment, I thought she might come over to speak with me, but then her lawyer whispered something in her ear, and she turned away. I spent that night alone in the hotel room I'd booked near the courthouse, unable to sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah's words in court. I want to know my mother is on my side. Had I really given her reason to doubt that? Everything I'd done, everything, had been to protect her, but maybe protection wasn't what she needed anymore. Maybe what she needed was for me to believe in her. The next morning we all gathered in the courtroom again. Sarah looked as tired as I felt, dark circles under her eyes visible even beneath her carefully applied makeup. Had she slept as poorly as I had? Judge Monroe entered the courtroom, her expression unreadable. After careful consideration of the arguments presented yesterday, I've reached a decision. The room fell silent. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. While I understand Mrs. Wilson's desire to protect her daughter from potential financial mistakes, I also recognize Ms. Wilson's right to increasing autonomy as she matures. Therefore, I am ordering a modification of the trust as follows. Judge Monroe adjusted her glasses and read from her notes. First, the age restriction will be lowered from 30 to 25. Second, Ms. Wilson will receive phased distributions beginning on her 21st birthday. 10% of the principal at age 21, 25% at age 23, and the remaining 65% at age 25. Sarah's lawyer leaned over to whisper something to her, but she shook her head slightly, her eyes fixed on the judge. Third, Judge Monroe continued, Mrs. Wilson will remain as trustee, but the trust will be modified to include quarterly reporting requirements and mandatory consultation with Ms. Wilson on all investment decisions. I glanced at Sarah, trying to gauge her reaction. Her face remained impassive. Finally, the judge said, I am ordering both parties to attend financial counseling together, once per month for the next year. Mrs. Wilson needs to learn to step back, and Ms. Wilson needs to learn the complexities of managing substantial wealth. The court will receive reports from the counselor to ensure compliance. Judge Monroe looked at both of us over her glasses. This ruling attempts to balance protection with independence, and most importantly, to rebuild the trust that has been damaged in your relationship. Are there any questions? Sarah's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client had hoped for immediate access to at least a portion of her inheritance. I understand, Judge Monroe replied. But Ms. Wilson will have access to distributions for education, health, and reasonable living expenses, as the original trust stipulated. If there are specific needs, she can petition the court. The lawyer looked like he wanted to argue further, but Sarah touched his arm and shook her head. He sat down reluctantly. If there are no other questions, court is adjourned. Judge Monroe banged her gavel and stood to leave. As people began to file out of the courtroom, I approached Sarah cautiously. Can we talk? She hesitated, then nodded. Not here. Meet me at the coffee shop across the street in 15 minutes. I waited at the coffee shop, nervously shredding a napkin as the minutes ticked by. What if she changed her mind? What if she decided not to come? But exactly 15 minutes later, Sarah walked through the door. She ordered a latte at the counter, then came to sit across from me. She looked so grown up, so composed. When had my little girl turned into this poised young woman? I'm sorry, we both said simultaneously, then paused, surprised. You first, I offered. Sarah took a deep breath. I'm sorry I went behind your back with the court petition. I should have tried harder to work things out with you directly. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the inheritance right away, I replied. I should have trusted you more. Sarah traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. Do you think we can do what the judge ordered? The financial counseling? I'd like to try, I said honestly. I want to repair our relationship, Sarah. That's more important to me than any amount of money. She nodded slowly. I want that too. She took a sip of her latte. But I need you to understand something, Mom. I'm not a child anymore. I need to make my own decisions, even my own mistakes. I know, I said softly. It's just hard to let go. From the moment you were born, my job has been to protect you. It's not easy to switch that off. You don't have to switch it off completely, Sarah said, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Just turn down the volume a little. I laughed, feeling some of the tension between us ease. I can try to do that. We talked for nearly 2 hours, more openly than we had in months. Sarah told me about Princeton, her classes, her roommate, the literary magazine she'd joined. I told her about the house, how empty it felt without her, how I was thinking of selling it and buying something smaller. You should, Sarah encouraged. That house has too many memories now, not all of them good. As we were preparing to leave, Sarah asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you think Dad really believed I had a gambling problem? Or was it all just a way to cover his tracks? I considered my answer carefully. I think your father was a complicated man who made a lot of mistakes. Maybe he convinced himself you had a problem because it was easier than facing his own. Or maybe he really was trying to protect you in his own flawed way. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I may never know the truth, will I? Probably not, I admitted. But we can decide what we do with the truth we have now, how we move forward. 3 months later, Sarah came home for winter break. Our first financial counseling session had been awkward, but productive. The counselor, Ms. Rivera, had helped us establish ground rules for discussing money without triggering old resentments. The key, Ms. Rivera had told us, is to separate the financial decisions from the emotional baggage. Focus on the numbers, the goals, the strategies, not on the past. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes our sessions would devolve into arguments about trust and independence, but we were trying, both of us, and slowly we were finding our way back to each other. The weekend before Sarah was due to return to school for the spring semester, I surprised her with a visit to the offices of Westfield Financial Advisors. "What are we doing here?" she asked as we walked into the sleek downtown building. "Meeting someone," I replied, trying to hide my nervousness. This was either going to heal our relationship or damage it further. I was taking a risk. In the conference room, a middle-aged man in a well-tailored suit greeted us. "Mrs. Wilson, Ms. Wilson. I'm Robert Tanner, Senior Financial Advisor." After exchanging pleasantries, I explained why I'd asked for the meeting. "Mr. Tanner, I'd like to discuss the possibility of your firm serving as co-trustee for my daughter's inheritance." Sarah looked at me in surprise. "Mom, what are you doing?" I took her hand. "I've been thinking about what you said in court, about wanting to know I'm on your side. This is me, trying to show you that I am." Mr. Tanner outlined how the arrangement would work, how his firm would review all distribution requests, provide quarterly investment reports, and help mediate any disagreements between Sarah and me. "So you're stepping back?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Not completely," I clarified. "But I'm acknowledging that I need help, that we both might benefit from having a neutral third party involved." After the meeting, as we walked back to the car, Sarah was quiet. Finally, she said, "That was a big step for you." I nodded. "It was scary. It still is. But I keep thinking about what your father said to me once. Money is just a tool to protect the ones you love. I think maybe I've been using that tool wrong." "How so?" Sarah asked. "By trying to control the money. I was controlling you, and that wasn't protecting you. It was just pushing you away." I smiled ruefully. "Sometimes the best protection is giving someone the skills to protect themselves." Sarah linked her arm through mine, a gesture she hadn't made since she was much younger. "Thank you, Mom." For a moment, I thought we might finally be okay, that we had turned a corner. I couldn't have been more wrong. 2 weeks after Sarah returned to Princeton, I received a certified letter from the court. Sarah had filed another petition, this time alleging that I had breached my fiduciary duty as trustee by making risky investments with the trust assets. I was stunned. What investments? I had barely touched the portfolio since James died, leaving everything in the conservative mix of bonds and blue-chip stocks he had established. I called Sarah immediately. "What is this about? What investments?" "Don't act innocent," she said coldly. "I've seen the statements, the offshore accounts, the transfers." "Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about," I insisted. "There are no offshore accounts." "Save it for court, Mom," she snapped, and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, the phone still in my hand, completely bewildered. What statements was she talking about? What transfers? With shaking hands, I called Mr. Peterson. "I need all the records of James's accounts," I told him. "Everything. Bank statements, investment accounts, credit cards. Going back at least 2 years before his death." Mr. Peterson sounded concerned. "Claire, what's going on?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But something's very wrong. It took 3 days for Mr. Peterson to compile all the records. 3 days of sleepless nights, of unanswered calls to Sarah, of growing dread. When the documents finally arrived, I spread them across my dining room table and began to sort through them, methodically. Banking records, investment statements, tax returns, and then I found it. A bank statement from an account I'd never seen before, at a bank I'd never heard of, in the Cayman Islands. An account in James's name, with transfers totaling over $2 million in the year before his death. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the second name on the account, Sarah Wilson. My 18-year-old daughter was co-owner of an offshore account containing millions of dollars, an account that, as far as I could tell, had never been disclosed to the probate court or included in the estate inventory. I stared at the statement, trying to make sense of it. Why would James put Sarah's name on an offshore account? When had he done it? And most importantly, did Sarah know about it? The date on the account opening documents answered one question. The account had been established just after Sarah's 18th birthday, about 4 months before James's death. The timing couldn't be coincidental. I picked up my phone and called Sarah again. This time, she answered. "I found the Cayman account," I said without preamble. There was a long pause. Then, "So you admit it exists?" "Yes, it exists. But Sarah, I had nothing to do with it. The account was opened by your father, with you, as co-owner. Did you know about this?" Another pause. "Of course I knew. Dad set it up for me." My heart sank. Why? He said it was my insurance policy. In case anything happened to him, I'd have money that no one could control. Not the courts, not the trustees, not you. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was disturbing. Sarah, your father was hiding assets from the court. That's illegal. "It's only illegal if someone reports it," Sarah replied, her voice unnervingly calm. "Is that what this new court petition is about?" I asked, trying to understand. "Are you threatening to expose the offshore account if I don't give you control of the trust?" "I wouldn't call it a threat, Mom. More like leverage." I felt like I was talking to a stranger, not my daughter. "Sarah, this isn't you. You don't blackmail people, you don't hide money in offshore accounts." "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think," she said coldly. Maybe Dad understood me better. The words stung, but I forced myself to stay focused. "If you knew about this account all along, why are you just bringing it up now? Why go through the first court hearing at all?" "Because I wanted to do things the right way first," Sarah admitted. "I wanted to give you a chance to be reasonable. But you sided with the judge, accepting those ridiculous conditions." "They weren't ridiculous, Sarah. They were a compromise. A compromise that still leaves me begging for my own money for the next 7 years," she retorted. "No thanks. Here's my new offer. Withdraw as trustee, petition the court to dissolve the trust, and I'll forget about the offshore account. Nobody needs to know." My mind was reeling. This calculating, manipulative person on the phone couldn't be my daughter. The Sarah I knew was that honest, principled, compassionate. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "You have 48 hours, Sarah replied. "Then I go to the court with what I know." After she hung up, I sat in my silent kitchen, feeling more alone than I ever had. What had happened to my daughter? Had James corrupted her somehow? Or had there always been this coldness in her that I'd refused to see? I thought about her words. Maybe Dad understood me better. Had he? James had always said Sarah was like him. Ambitious, strategic, willing to bend the rules to get what she wanted. I'd always seen those traits as positives, signs of her drive and determination. Now I wondered if they were something darker. For 2 days, I agonized over what to do. If I gave in to Sarah's demands, I'd be complicit in hiding assets from the court, potentially committing a crime. But if I didn't, my own daughter was threatening to expose her father's illegal activities, which could lead to criminal charges against her as well. There had to be another way. On the morning of the deadline, I called Sarah. "I've made my decision, but I won't discuss it over the phone. Can you come home this weekend?" She sounded suspicious. "Why can't you tell me now?" "Because this needs to be done face to face. Please, Sarah." After a moment's hesitation, she agreed. "Fine. I'll be there Friday evening." I spent the next 3 days preparing. I called Mr. Peterson and asked him to join us. I spoke with Ms. Rivera, our financial counselor, who agreed to be present as well. And I made an appointment with a forensic accountant who specialized in offshore banking. When Sarah arrived on Friday, she looked tired but determined. Her eyes widened when she saw the group assembled in our living room. "What is this?" she demanded. "An intervention?" "In a way," I admitted. "Please, sit down." Reluctantly, she took a seat on the couch, as far from me as possible. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began. "About your father understanding you better than I do. And maybe that's true, in some ways. But there's something you need to understand about your father, Sarah." I nodded to Mr. Peterson, who opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. "These are records of your father's gambling activities over the past 5 years. Casino markers. Loans from questionable sources. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, not just the one in the Caymans." Sarah's expression remained defiant, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Your father wasn't setting up that account to protect you," I continued gently. "He was using you. He needed a place to hide money from his creditors. And from me. He put your name on the account because he knew that if anything happened to him, his creditors would come after his estate. But they might not look at accounts belonging to his barely adult daughter." "That's not true," Sarah protested. "Dad loved me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." "I believe he did love you," I said. "In his way. But James was a master manipulator, Sarah. He made people see what he wanted them to see. He made me believe you had a gambling problem when it was really his. He made you believe I was trying to control you when I was trying to protect you. And he made you believe that offshore account was for your benefit, when really it was for his." Ms. Rivera leaned forward. "Sarah, in our sessions, we've talked about patterns of behavior, about how children often recreate the dynamics they observed in their parents. Have you considered that your father may have been modeling some unhealthy behaviors that you're now adopting?" Sarah's eyes flashed. "I am nothing like him." "Then prove it," I challenged her. "Do the right thing. Help me find all the hidden accounts, all the assets he concealed. Let's bring everything into the open, deal with whatever consequences come, and then move forward honestly." Sarah looked from me to Mr. Peterson to Ms. Rivera, her expression conflicted. "What about the trust? What about my inheritance?" "If we do this right," Mr. Peterson said, "the court might actually look favorably on a request to modify the trust terms, especially if you're the one who comes forward with information about the hidden assets." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What happens if I don't agree? If I stick to my original plan?" I took a deep breath. "Then I'll have to report the offshore account to the court myself, which would mean implicating you as well, since your name is on the account." "You'd do that?" Sarah looked incredulous. "You'd turn in your own daughter?" "I don't want to," I said honestly. "It would break my heart, but I can't be part of a deception like this, Sarah. And I don't think you can either. Not really. Not the daughter I raised." Another long silence filled the room. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more than just the Cayman account." "I thought there might be," I said gently. "Dad had accounts in Switzerland, Singapore, and the British Virgin Islands. He set them all up in the last year of his life." Sarah looked down at her hands. "He said it was estate planning, tax optimization. I believed him." "Of course you did," I said. "He was your father." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I was so angry when I found out about the trust restrictions. It felt like one more way he was controlling me from beyond the grave. Then I remembered the offshore accounts, and it seemed like a way to win." "Win what?" Ms. Rivera asked. "I don't know." Sarah shook her head. "My independence? My dignity? I just didn't want to be manipulated anymore." I moved to sit beside her on the couch, leaving a small space between us. "I understand that feeling better than you know. I spent 20 years being manipulated by your father, making excuses for his behavior, believing his lies. It's a hard pattern to break." Sarah looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in months. "How do we fix this, Mom?" "Together," I said simply. "We go to the court together. We disclose everything. We face the consequences together." 2 weeks later, we sat in Judge Monroe's chambers, along with Mr. Peterson, the forensic accountant, and the district attorney. Sarah had provided complete information about all the offshore accounts, totaling nearly $5 million that James had hidden from the estate. Judge Monroe's expression was grave as she reviewed the documents. "This is a serious matter," she said. Hiding assets from probate is a criminal offense. We understand, Your Honor, Mr. Peterson replied. But my clients are the ones who brought this information forward voluntarily. The district attorney nodded. Given Ms. Wilson's age at the time the accounts were established, and the fact that she's cooperating fully, we're not pursuing charges against her. As for James Wilson, well, we can't prosecute the dead. Judge Monroe turned to Sarah. Ms. Wilson, what would you like the court to do regarding these newly discovered assets? Sarah straightened in her chair. I want them added to the trust, Your Honor. Subject to the same terms you established in your previous ruling. The judge raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised. Even though you contested those terms before? Yes, Sarah said firmly. I've had time to reconsider. The phased distribution approach makes sense. And in the meantime, I'd like to establish a charitable foundation with a portion of the interest income to help families affected by gambling addiction. I looked at my daughter, pride swelling in my chest. Despite everything, all the lies, all the manipulation, all the pain, she was choosing to do something good, something healing. Judge Monroe seemed impressed as well. That's a commendable suggestion, Ms. Wilson. I'll take it under advisement as I determine how to proceed with these additional assets. As we left the courthouse, Sarah linked her arm through mine, just as she had that day after meeting with the financial advisor. But this time, the gesture felt different, more genuine, more hopeful. I'm sorry, Mom, she said quietly, for everything. I'm sorry too, sweetheart. I should have been more transparent from the beginning. Sarah smiled ruefully. We both got played by Dad, didn't we? We did, I acknowledged. But that doesn't have to define us going forward. No, she agreed. It doesn't. That evening, as we sat on the patio watching the sunset, Sarah asked the question that had been hovering between us for months. Do you think Dad ever really loved us? Or was it all just manipulation? I considered my answer carefully. I think love and manipulation can exist side by side, especially in someone as complicated as your father. He could love us and still use us. He could want the best for us and still put his own needs first. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I keep thinking about something Ms. Rivera said in our last session about how we can acknowledge the harm someone caused without erasing the good they brought to our lives. That's true, I said. Your father gave us some wonderful moments. He also caused a lot of pain. Both things can be true at the same time. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I think I need to stop trying to figure him out. Maybe instead I should focus on figuring out who I want to be. I squeezed her hand. I think that's very wise. 3 months later, we stood in the doorway of Sarah's new apartment near the Princeton campus. The spring semester had ended, but she'd decided to stay for summer classes. The small 2-bedroom unit was modest but comfortable, paid for with a reasonable distribution from the trust that we had agreed on together. It's perfect, I said, looking around the sunny living room. Close to campus, but still quiet. And the rent is reasonable, Sarah added, even by non-trust fund standards. I laughed. You're learning financial responsibility already. Sarah's expression grew serious. I've been thinking a lot about that offshore money, about how easy it would have been to take it and disappear, to become the person Dad was grooming me to be. But you didn't, I reminded her. No, she smiled slightly. I guess I'm more like you than I thought. The words warmed me in a way I couldn't describe. After everything we'd been through, that simple acknowledgement felt like a precious gift. We still have a long road ahead, I cautioned. Trust takes time to rebuild. I know, Sarah agreed. But at least now we're walking in the same direction. As I prepared to leave for my flight home, Sarah handed me a small wrapped package. I got you something. Inside was a delicate silver frame containing a photo of the two of us from Sarah's high school graduation. We were smiling, our arms around each other, unaware of the storms that lay ahead. To remind us both of who we really are, Sarah said softly. Underneath all the hurt and the anger, we're still us. I hugged her tightly, tears stinging my eyes. We are, and we always will be. If you've ever faced betrayal from someone you love, comment. I needed to hear this. 6 months later, I was in my kitchen making coffee when my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Mom, you won't believe this," she said, her voice a mixture of shock and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. "I just got a letter from Singapore, from a bank I've never heard of." My stomach tightened. "Another offshore account?" "Yes and no," Sarah replied. "It's an account in my name, only my name, with a video message from Dad that was set to be delivered to me on my 19th birthday. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "Have you watched it?" "Not yet. I wanted you to be with me when I did." I was on a plane to Princeton that afternoon. Sarah met me at the airport, looking pale but composed. We barely spoke on the drive to her apartment, both of us lost in our own thoughts, our own anxieties about what James might have to say from beyond the grave. In her living room, Sarah set up her laptop on the coffee table. The video file was attached to an email from the bank, along with documents showing an account in her name containing just over $3 million. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her finger hovering over the play button. I took her hand. "Whatever he says, remember, we decide what power it has over us." Sarah nodded and pressed play. James's face filled the screen. He looked tired, I thought, older than I remembered. This must have been recorded shortly before his death. "Sarah, my princess," he began, using the pet name he'd called her since she was small. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you've reached your 19th birthday. First happy birthday. I wish I could be there to celebrate with you." He shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. "I've set up this account for you, separate from everything else. Your mother doesn't know about it. The trustees don't know. This is just for you, a safety net that no one can take away." Sarah glanced at me, but I kept my eyes on the screen. "You're probably wondering why I've done this," James continued. "The truth is, I don't trust the system. I've spent my life watching how quickly fortunes can be lost, through bad luck, bad decisions, or bad people. I wanted to make sure that no matter what happened to me, or to the rest of our assets, you would always have this." He leaned closer to the camera. "There are things about me your mother doesn't know, things I'm not proud of, debts, mistakes, people I've crossed who might someday come looking for what they think I owe them. If that happens, if anything happens that puts your inheritance at risk, use this money, use it, and don't look back." I felt Sarah tense beside me. "But Sarah," James's voice grew softer, more intimate. "There's something else you should know, something I've never told anyone, not even your mother." He took a deep breath. "I'm not the self-made success story everyone thinks I am. My first construction company, the one that gave me the capital to start Wilson Construction, it was funded with money from some very dangerous people. People who wanted a legitimate business to run their money through." My breath caught in my throat. What was he saying? "I got out eventually," James continued. "Built everything clean after that. But those early years," he shook his head, "I've spent my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up with me. That's why I've always been so obsessed with security, with having enough money. It wasn't greed, Sarah. It was fear." Sarah paused the video, her hand shaking. "Did you know any of this?" I shook my head, too stunned to speak. After a moment, Sarah resumed playback. "I'm telling you this now because I want you to understand why I've set things up the way I have," James said. "The trust, the conditions, those are to protect you from the outside world. But this account, this is to protect you from the trust itself, from any complications that might arise after I'm gone." He smiled sadly. "Your mother is a good woman, Sarah. Better than I deserved. But she doesn't understand the world the way we do, you and I. She sees things in black and white. We see the shades of gray." I felt a chill at his words, at the way he was trying to create an alliance with Sarah against me, even from the grave. "Use this money wisely," James continued. "Don't tell anyone about it unless absolutely necessary. Not your mother, not any future husband, not even your own children someday. This is your insurance policy, in a world where nothing is certain." He paused, his expression softening. I love you, Princess. More than you'll ever know. Be smarter than I was. Be better. But never forget to protect yourself first." The video ended, leaving us sitting in silence, the final frame of James's face frozen on the screen. "Well," I finally said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "That was unbelievable," Sarah finished for me. She closed the laptop with a decisive click. "All this time, I thought I knew him, but I didn't know him at all." I put my arm around her shoulders. "None of us did, sweetheart. Not really." Sarah leaned against me, something she hadn't done since she was much younger. "What do we do about the money? About the account?" It was a complicated question. Legally, ethically, emotionally. "What do you want to do?" I asked instead of offering my own opinion. Sarah thought for a long moment. "I want to bring it into the light," she finally said. "Add it to the trust, just like the other accounts. I don't want any more secrets." I felt a rush of pride so intense, it brought tears to my eyes. "I think that's the right decision. But," Sarah continued, "before we do that, I want to make sure that what Dad said about his first company, about the dangerous people, I want to make sure that's all in the past, that there's no actual threat." It was a reasonable concern. "We could hire a private investigator," I suggested. "Someone with experience in financial crimes." Sarah nodded. "And maybe we should talk to Mr. Peterson, too. He might know something about Dad's early business dealings." We spent the next few weeks quietly investigating James's past. Mr. Peterson connected us with a former FBI agent who specialized in money laundering cases. What we discovered was both better and worse than we feared. Yes, James had indeed started his first company with money from an organized crime syndicate. Yes, he had helped them launder money for nearly 3 years. But then he had done something unexpected. He had gone to the FBI and turned state's evidence. "Your husband was in witness protection for 2 years, the investigator told me during our final meeting. From 1992 to 1994, he testified against some very powerful people, put 3 of them in prison for life. That's why he changed his name," I realized. James wasn't even his real name? The investigator shook his head. His birth name was David Mercer. When he left witness protection, he was allowed to keep his new identity, James Wilson. I felt like the floor was tilting beneath me. I had been married to a man for 20 years, had a child with him, and never known his real name. "Is there any ongoing threat?" Sarah asked, always practical. "Anyone from that old life who might still be looking for him? Or for us?" "No," the investigator assured us. "The organization was dismantled decades ago. The principals are either dead or still in prison. Your father's fears, while once valid, were outdated." Sarah and I looked at each other, both processing this new information. "So all of this, the secret accounts, the video message, the warnings, it was all based on a threat that no longer exists," Sarah said slowly. "It seems that way," the investigator agreed. "But fear can linger long after the danger has passed. Your father spent formative years looking over his shoulder. That kind of vigilance becomes a habit, a lens through which you view the world." After the investigator left, Sarah and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I keep thinking about what Dad said in that video, about seeing the world in shades of gray, about how you see things in black and white." I smiled ruefully. "He wasn't entirely wrong about that. But he wasn't entirely right either," Sarah countered. "He acted like his way of seeing the world was more sophisticated, more realistic. But look where it led him. A life of secrets and fear, of always assuming the worst. While my naive black and white thinking led me to what? Trust? Honesty? Transparency?" I shook my head. "I'll take my approach any day." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Me too. I don't want to live like he did. Always hiding something. Always waiting for disaster." The next day, we flew to New York to meet with the Singapore Bank's U.S. representative. With the help of Mr. Peterson, we initiated the process of transferring the $3 million into the existing trust. "Are you sure about this?" the bank representative asked Sarah. "Once these funds are moved into the trust, they'll be subject to all its restrictions." I'm sure, Sarah said firmly. The restrictions are there to protect me, not control me. I understand that now. As we left the bank, walking side by side down the busy Manhattan sidewalk, I felt lighter than I had in months, years even. The last of James's secrets had been exposed. The last of his manipulations had been neutralized. What now? Sarah asked as we waited for a taxi. Now we live, I said simply, without secrets, without fear. 1 month later, we sat in Judge Monroe's chambers once again, explaining about the Singapore account and our investigation into James's past. This is certainly an unusual situation, the judge said, reviewing the documentation we'd provided. And a disturbing one. Mr. Wilson appears to have gone to extraordinary lengths to hide assets. Yes, Your Honor, Mr. Peterson agreed. But as you can see, my clients have been equally diligent in bringing those hidden assets to light. Judge Monroe looked at Sarah. Ms. Wilson, this is the second time you've voluntarily disclosed assets that were, essentially, yours free and clear. May I ask why? Sarah met the judge's gaze steadily. Because I don't want anything that comes with strings attached, Your Honor. Even invisible ones. My father tried to bind me to his way of thinking, his way of seeing the world. I'm choosing a different path. Judge Monroe nodded, clearly impressed. Your maturity is commendable. She turned to me. Mrs. Wilson, given everything that's happened, do you still believe the trust restrictions are necessary? I considered the question carefully. I believe some structure is still beneficial, Your Honor, but perhaps not as rigid as before. After some discussion, Judge Monroe modified the trust terms once again. Sarah would now receive 25% of the principal at age 21, another 25% at age 23, and the remaining 50% at age 25. Additionally, she would immediately gain co-trustee status with equal decision-making power regarding investments and distributions. This arrangement acknowledges Ms. Wilson's demonstrated responsibility while still providing a gradual transition to full financial independence. The judge explained. I believe it strikes the right balance. As we left the courthouse for what we hoped would be the final time, Sarah asked, Do you think we'll ever fully understand him? Why he did what he did? I thought about James, or David, the man I never knew, about his early years in witness protection, living in constant fear, about the elaborate web of lies and secrets he had constructed around himself, about the way he had tried to draw Sarah into that web. I don't know, I admitted. Some people are puzzles we never fully solve, but maybe understanding isn't the point. Then what is? Sarah asked. Learning, growing, choosing our own path. I smiled at my daughter, my strong, ethical, compassionate daughter, who had faced temptation and chosen integrity. You've already done that part beautifully. 2 years later, Sarah graduated from Princeton with honors. As I watched her cross the stage to receive her diploma, I thought about everything we had weathered together. The betrayals, the revelations, the painful truths, and the healing that followed. When James died, I thought our family was broken beyond repair. In many ways it was. The family we had been, the one built on James's lies and secrets, that family was gone forever. But something new had emerged from the ashes. Something stronger, more authentic. A relationship between Sarah and me that was no longer defined by James's manipulations, but by our own choices, our own values. After the ceremony, as we walked across the sunlit campus, Sarah linked her arm through mine. You know what I've been thinking about lately? She asked. What's that? Dad's last words in that video. Be smarter than I was. Be better. She looked at me, her eyes clear and determined. I think maybe that's the only good advice he ever gave me. I squeezed her arm. And you've taken it to heart. We both have, she corrected me. We've been smarter. We've been better. That evening, as we celebrated with dinner at Sarah's favorite restaurant, she handed me a small gift box. Inside was a key. What's this? I asked. A key to my new apartment in Boston, she explained. I accepted that job offer from the nonprofit I told you about. I was delighted but confused. "Why are you giving me a key?" Sarah smiled. "Because I want you to visit whenever you want. No barriers, no secrets. Just us, figuring out this new chapter together." I held the key tightly, this small metal symbol of trust, of openness, of a future without fear. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "when I think about it now, the inheritance wasn't really the money. The true inheritance was the choice, to either continue Dad's legacy of secrets and manipulation, or to create something different." "And you chose differently," I said proudly. "We both did," Sarah replied. "Every time we chose honesty over deception, transparency over secrecy, trust over fear, we were rewriting our inheritance." As we raised our glasses in a toast, I thought about that day in the courtroom when Sarah had shouted, "This is impossible." She had been right in a way. It had seemed impossible then that we would ever find our way back to each other, that we would ever untangle ourselves from James's web of lies. But we had done the impossible, day by day, truth by truth, choice by choice. And that, I realized, was the true inheritance I wanted to leave my daughter. Not money, not property, but the knowledge that even the most broken things can be rebuilt if you're willing to bring them into the light. That secrets lose their power when exposed. That trust, once shattered, can be painstakingly restored. That nothing, not even the impossible, is beyond repair when faced with courage and love. This wasn't the last time I had to fight against the manipulation of my own family. The next video shows what happened when I discovered James had another child, a son who suddenly appeared at Sarah's graduation with a claim to half of everything we had. Join me next time to hear how we face this new, impossible challenge.